Hello there, Parth Sharma this side, bringing you chess classics, in which I'm covering top 15 games played by Vishwanath and Anand. If you're new to this channel, then don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're already subscribed, then do press the bell icon for future notifications. And if you like my work, then you can support me on Patreon and PayPal. You will find the links in the description because your support is my motivation, which keeps me going. Along with the link, you can also find the PGN of the game that I'm covering in this video. So happy days, isn't it? So at number 9 in top 15 games played by Vishwanathan Anand is his game against Kamsky from 1995 candidates final game 9 in Las Palmas, and the winner of this match would challenge Garry Kasparov for the World Chess Championship match later that year. And going into game 9, the score was, I would say, 4 each, where Kamsky drawing first blood in the first game itself and Anand just knocking the door back, or I should say giving back a good riposte in game 3. And there were a series of few draws, and we come to game 9, and it was very important for either of the players to gain some momentum, and it turned out to be it was Anand who turned the momentum to his side and eventually came on top. So that was very good. And without further ado, let's continue with the game that I would be looking at. So Anand is white here, Kamsky is black, score is 4 apiece. You need something big and you have to win. Let's see what happens. Anand opens with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez, a6, the Morphy defense of Ruy Lopez, bishop tucks back to a4, knight to f6, castles, bishop to e7, the closed variation of Ruy Lopez. Normally, I won't say normally, but in few variations black does take the pawn on e4, and that lead to open variations of the Ruy Lopez, but we will come to that in some other time. Let's focus onto this game. Rook to e1, the Aver back variation, very well known, b5, bishop to b3, d6 by Kamsky, so which means that he doesn't want to go into Marsha, he just want to go into the conventional Spanish opening or the Ruy Lopez opening, so to say. c3, castles, and now h3. So this is all very standard stuff, this is all very well known, this is all theory. And bishop to b7, the floor system. Normally you might see even knight to b8, the Breyer variation, because since this pawn is defended, the destination square of this knight somewhat changes after playing knight to b8 and to d7 to initiate knight to c5 and to try and attack this bishop, also to initiate c5 in some cases, and to fix the pawn structure by playing pawn to c4, and so on. If we go to floor system by Kamsky, he played he plays bishop to b7, and now d4, rook to e8. This is all standard stuff. If black wants to, he can just take and let's say try to tuck this bishop by playing knight to a5, or maybe some other few lines as well, or even knight to d4, not knight to d4 but knight to a5 in many cases too. Let's say if takes knight to a5, and then you can push for c5. That might be promising for black, but here he goes for rook e8, and Anand goes for knight b to d2. So his basic idea is to play this knight to here and to here, and generally in some cases it can go to here, but normally in Spanish openings the main motif in this system is to play knight here and to fix itself on f5, so that it can keep I would say a very tricky eye on this black king whenever he tries to, if black tries to do something mischievous. And this is somewhat a main motive, but black can also try to prevent that by playing pawn to g6, so that after knight to g3 white options get gets very restricted and limited because he cannot come here or here for that matter. But by playing g6, that can leave this hole. So this dark square bishop, if it finds itself landing on h6 square, then that can, I would say, that can call for some trouble in these positions. But anyway, that's not what happens in this game. Bishop to f8 by Kamsky. So opening line for this rook. So he's basically prepared for this and try to give this rook the semi-open file with opponent's pawn on it. Remember, opponent's pawn in the semi-open file, rooks are best suited in that positions. And a4, the conventional Spanish idea is to this exchange here and then to play bishop to a4 so that this knight stays pinned to this rook on e8. Can be very annoying, but offers some very good chances for black as well, because black is not forced to take this pawn. So black can, I would say, refuse to take the pawn and let force white to take the pawn. Kamsky plays h6 to stop knight to g5, but this is not the plan that he wants to execute. Bishop to c2 by Kamsky, beg your pardon, Anand, and now Kamsky takes on d4, cd4, and knight to b4. This is all somewhat pretty much theory because we have seen these kind of positions, especially in Kasparov-Karpov games, in the World Chess Championship games. We have seen these lines. Normally the ideas of rook a3 are in the air. A lot of times we have seen that. So bishop tucks back to b1, that's the main important move, and white would still try to play rook to a3, but that won't be so easy. If this knight doesn't stay on b4 and this pawn stays on d6, then rook a3 idea can be a bit, then rook a3 idea might work, because then there are two pieces in the way of this bishop which is eyeing on a3. But if either of the pieces move, then rook a3 can be a risky option, because then rook a3, rook g3 plan might not work, or even rook e3 plan for that matter might not work the way it could, or I should say the way it can. So Kamsky plays queen to d7, and his basic idea is to, let's say, play bishop to c6 and to keep more pressure on the pawn on a4. Idea well worth considering, and not to forget to connect the rooks. So it does another job, let's say, to giving this a rook an option to come to d8. So Anand gives extra protection to that pawn on a4 by playing pawn to b3, and now g6. So he's trying to fianchetto this bishop on this long diagonal. Because of this move b3, the b2 square is, this line of bishop would be bang open to the a1 square, to the rook on a1, and as we all know, the pawns cannot go backwards, they always go upwards. So once b3 is played, this b2 file is bang open. But on the other hand, by playing this, now this file can also get open for white's bishop, and which it does. Anand plays bishop to b2 and bishop to g7 by Kamsky. So far so good, nothing fussy has happened. And now queen to c1 by Kamsky. So basically giving this bishop a defender in a form of queen, and also he wants to play, let's say, d5 to close this bishop's path on this long diagonal, because it's very important, because if this bishop gets the access, chances are that black can execute, let's say, queen to c6 as well in that position, and that won't be pleasant. Also, if c5, then pawn can also take, but you don't need to take with the pawn. If c5, then you can just play e5 and the position would still be fine. So queen c1 is basically to give this another guard to this bishop, and rook a to c8. So initiating c5 is main option, and bishop comes to c3 to knock this knight away from b4 square, and now c5 to giving that knight protection. And notice that this rook is eyeing right down the queen, so the rook has I would say, a camouflaged eye on the queen on c1. So white has to be very careful dealing with his queen when it comes to coming right in front of rook's line. So Anand understandably closes the structure in the center by playing pawn to d5. And Kamsky plays queen to e7, which looked quite odd because you are moving this queen more than once in the opening. Ideal would be to just say, let's say, play rook to c7, or playing this rook backwards might have been a better option. Queen to e7 anyway, things aren't so bad for black. And Anand plays knight to f1. So there we go. His intention is to play either knight to g3 or knight to e3. And Kamsky should have played this knight to d7. Just get rid of this bishop. But knight to d7 can also come with some risks, because then white can exchange on g7, which gives potential weaknesses as far as this h6 pawn is concerned, or even h6 square for white's queen for that matter. It can be very difficult, or I would say double-edged in that case. But here Kamsky plays knight to h7, which looked quite odd because it is pretty clear that he wants to play knight to g5 to exchange this knight here. And let's say play queen takes, and position would still, I would say, fizzle out to a draw, or I would say simplify to a draw. And that would be again, I would say, fine for both colors, but white would still have the edge, because after bishop takes g7, notice the dark square bishop, which was a key defender to this black king, has suddenly disappeared, and now king has to take it. And you might see that with lack of that bishop on g7, which was keeping an eye not only at this rook, but also it was giving a basic, or I would say good protection to this king. And with that bishop disappearing, I just fumbled out the words. With that bishop disappearing, black's kingside position looks pretty much fragile, and Anand has a plan now. He plays knight to e3, and understanding the weaknesses of the position, that h6 pawn can be a bit vulnerable, threat is to play knight to g4 and then crashing out on that pawn on h6. Kamsky stops that idea and plays pawn to h5. So queen to d2, and the best move here for black should have been to play queen to f6. Looks very odd, looks very tricky move, attacking the rook, as you can see, but then rook can come to a3, and you don't want to play knight to g5. I will show you it in some time. Black can play knight to f8 in this position, and let's say after pawn trade and rook a5, the things, I would say, not okay, because this pawn is dropping. But then you can play bishop to a6, you can hold the structure well, and that would still be okay in that case. For instance, if you can play knight to d7 here, and then bishop to, and after takes, then bishop to a6, you can somewhat have control of this e5 square. And without this e5 square, this bishop looks really dull, or I should say very bland at this b1 square, because it's biting on this pawn and has nothing good value. So that would be a better compensation for a pawn. Instead, after queen to d2, Kamsky plays king to g8. By the way, I should say, I forgot that after rook to a3, if you play knight to g5, well, that's not good. That's not good, because white can build tactically. You can just take the knight, and after queen takes g5, I'm afraid black would have a bad news by playing knight to f5, discovered attack on this queen. And if you go, let's say, king to f6, trying to defend, well, then f4, and the queen gets trapped. Not an ideal way to play this position, and that would be completely gone. After queen d2, Kamsky makes I would say, mistake by playing king to g8, and he overlooked a great sequence that Anand had up his sleeve. Anand first captured the pawn on b5, Kamsky recaptured, and take a pause and think what a spectacular move that Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's awesome. And if you just want to enjoy what Anand played in this position, knight to d1, fantastic move indeed. Double exclaim move, just brilliant. What does this do? It prepares knight to c3, gives another perspective to this knight, because this knight was somewhat redundant and it was restricting white's movement. That's not all. Knight on c3 would attack the pawn on b5, and rook on a5 would also be better, but then knight coming here on c3 would put tremendous pressure on black's forces. That's why king to f8, I would say king to g8, which was played two moves earlier, was an inaccuracy, I would say, a mistake in that case. And not to forget, it stops knight to g5 as well, creating white's own threat of playing knight to g5. Not an immediate threat, but a future threat, a tremendous threat in future. Because there are now, with this move knight to d1, there are so many targets in black's position that white can exploit it immensely. So knight has to go to a6, and now knight to c3. There we go, the plan to attack the pawn. But Kamsky can defend this pawn by playing pawn to b4, and that's why it was very important to drive this knight to a6, so that to vacate this b4 square for the pawn to advance and to give this pawn of protection. Anand can play knight to a4 here as well, but Anand didn't play knight to a4. He goes for clarity and plays knight to b5. And another superb move. Now this knight, what was actually restricting white, has suddenly become, I would say, a tremendous piece in this position, and it is obviously annoying black, because this knight has somewhat invaded in its space, and black would desperately try to get rid of that knight. So Kamsky played knight to c7, but now this bishop also comes to life. It was biting down this pawn, biting on this pawn by sitting there on b1. Not only does this move bishop to d3 connects the rooks are connected, but it also defends the knight here, and if this capture happens, then this bishop will sit on b5. We'll be keeping an eye on this rook as well. I would say superb use of resources, tremendous use of resources. So Kamsky had to take it, and after bishop takes b5, look at the pieces. They are looking very annoying. For this bishop is looking very annoying. This knight, this queen, and this open file for this rook. The movements are basically restricted. Now this bishop is, I would say, an absolute bad black light square bishop, and it isn't doing any good whatsoever. So now the rook was hit, so rook comes to d8, and now bishop to c4. So this bishop is finding another perspective of its own to just push for e5 and just create more and more weaknesses. And if e5, once this pawn takes, and if it doesn't take, then e6, and if this takes, then d6, and this bishop's line would be bang open. And excuse me, and here Kamsky played a move which was a mistake. He should have played knight to f8, but then after e5, pawn takes, knight takes, queen to d6. I would say, let's say g4, rook to a8, rook a to d1, and many moves afterwards. I would say the position would still be better. White would still be able to, I would say, choke the black into submission, but it would be very difficult. But after bishop to c4, Kamsky plays knight to f6. And Anand here made a little inaccuracy. He should have played e5 because this bangs open the structure after that. So pawn takes, knight takes, queen to c7, and now d6 looks tremendous. If you think that black can get away by taking the pawn on d6, I'm afraid it's not, because then bishop takes f7 check is tremendous. Queen cannot take because the rook would be on pre, and after king g7, white can simply tuck back by playing queen to c2, threatening queen takes g6, and black's position is completely collapsing. But after knight to f6, Anand plays queen to h6, which I would say gives a little bit of relief to Kamsky. Let's say if he plays queen to f8, now he wants to just get rid of queens and just go down into an endgame, and that would be, I would say, okay for both colors. Black would be able to hold on, but Anand doesn't want to go into that. He plays queen to g5. Best move should have been to play knight to h7 because this knight is attacked, and the best way would have been to defend is to play knight to h7. But instead Kamsky plays queen to g7, as it turns out to be a terrible mistake. Because after rook a7, suddenly there are massive threats in the position. Not only there would be a threat of playing e5, where if exchange d6 opening line of this bishop, this rook will also be eyeing indirectly to this queen. And at the moment this bishop is attacked, so either you have to play rook b8 or you have to move this bishop, which is already poor, absolutely redundant. It is, I think, position has already gone. Or even to play rook to c7, which was played in the game. Rook to c7 by Kamsky defending that bishop, and now bishop to a6. The bishop cannot take its opponent because of this pin, and double pressure on it, so rook to b8, the only way to defend it. And now e5, so Anand striking back here, and if pawn takes, then d6 looks tremendous. And also knight takes e5, not to forget, with this bishop changing its route to c4 right towards this king. So he plays knight to e8, giving this rook a defender, also evading the capture. But Anand just simplifies by playing rook takes b7, rook c takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and now queen to d8. This was the main plan. This was, I would say, the final position that Anand must have thought of while playing knight to d1, to get this queen's access right here, and also attacking the pawn on d6. Not immediately, but rather, I would say, creating a threat. So queen to f8, defending the pawn, and also defending the knight, so that this knight can move freely. And now comes rook to a1, threatening rook a8, I would say, targeting the pin immensely then. And if rook here, then pawn takes, puts a lot of pressure there as well, with threat of d7. So he plays knight to c7, comes out of the pin, and let's say if queen takes d6, getting rid of that pawn, then there is this knight takes d5, and this pawn ain't going anywhere. Black can simply roll down this pawn, and that will be happy days. But Anand is not having to exchange queens like that. He plays queen to d7, and now you can see black is running very low on moves, doesn't have any decent moves in this position, and not any decent defending moves as well. The threat is also to play queen to c6, attacking this rook, and if this rook moves, then this knight might drop, and this knight is already pinned, so it cannot move, and black is running very low on moves. So he plays queen to b8, understandably, but now queen can take on d6 because the queen is not attacking this queen directly, as we saw in the previous variation. And now white would simply want to play e6, e7, and game over. So Kamsky tries this one counter-attacking resource by playing pawn to c4. After b takes c4, b3, pawn is looking absolutely dangerous. Rook to b1, b2, and now he can well, he can play c5 by himself, or even he can play e6, but then the chances are that that pawn can easily be rolled out, as we saw before. So Anand, taking no risks whatsoever, plays queen to c5. Now he wants to push this passer down the board. Rook to b3 by Kamsky. So his basic idea is to play rook to c3 and rook to c1 check in order to promote this pawn or to get rook up. Well, he can just ignore that. Anand played here queen to d4. Well, he can just ignore that rook c3 idea, and he can play knight to g5. Looks equally strong. And let's say after rook c3, queen to e7, he has to defend this and this mate, so he has to play queen to f8, and after queen takes, king takes, rook will take that pawn down, and these pass as well. Eventually he takes the pawn, but then after d6, this pawn will really go down. There's absolutely nothing that Black would be able to do in that case. But Anand here played queen d4. Kamsky played queen to b4, so giving this protection to c3. So his idea is to play rook to c3. And now Anand goes for knight g5. He sees that idea. Rook c3 by Kamsky and queen to f4. So he is now on the attack, and if Black plays rook to c1 check, well, you just don't have to look at this rook. You can simply play king to h2, and that will be that. I mean, if you can try king to h2, but then rook takes b1. If you think that after king h2 you can take the rook, well, I'm afraid you cannot, because after queen takes f7, king h8, queen h7 is checkmate. So after king h2 you have to, let's say, come back to e7, but then rook takes b2 and white is totally winning, threatening pawn to d6, and also there is a threat of rook b8 check, and that will be that. So not an easy option here, or I would say after queen to f4, this was the game, that was the variation with rook c1 check. And here Kamsky makes, I would say, a decisive mistake which loses the game on the spot. Pawn to f5, because Anand can take this pawn en passant, and again if rook c1 check, then white can simply go king h2, and that will be that. And also this knight is hanging, as you can see. So Kamsky plays knight takes d5. If the pawn takes, queen is hanging, the pawn is pinned, but he overlooked Anand's next move. So take a pause and think what Anand played in this position which forced the resignation on the spot. Well, if you found it out, that's brilliant. And if you just want to see the move that Anand played which forced an immediate resignation, f7 check, and here Kamsky resigned the game, and with this win Anand got the momentum and he eventually won the candidates tournament, faced Kasparov, but he lost to Kasparov in the World Chess Championship final, which took place in September-October in New York. But it was a very good win, showed another prowess of Anand, a great attacker and also great utilizer of the resources. So what's the point? Obviously, if king here, then knight e6 will be game over, and if king g7, white will simply queen takes, and then knight e6 check, king h7, and queen takes f8 will be game over. You can try rook c1 check, but simply ignore that rook as usual by playing king to h2, and there is no defense to either knight g5 or queen g7 checkmate. As it turned out, after f7 check, Kamsky resigned. Wow, what a beautiful game this was. Probably one of the best, I would say. I've already given you what happened after that, but yeah, it was a good game, and deservedly so at number 9. Well, I hope you liked my video. I hope you liked my analysis. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow I will be bringing what the game at number 8, what would be at number 8. So as I say, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Cheers. Bye.